Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives. How do we face loss when someone we love dearly passes away? How do we cope with our emotions and feelings when we feel crippled with grief? How do we carry on when we know our whole world has ended? Will Staples lost his wife after a 3-month battle with cancer. He was left as the sole carer of 2 young boys who had lost their mum and found himself in a place in life that he had never expected to be in. Join us as we discuss with Will his journey through dark times, his vulnerability in admitting pain, and his honesty in reminding us that there is no given formula or textbook rule to follow when life hits us hard. Will's story is a moving account of one man's struggle to cope and raises issues which many of us face today. What happens when life doesn't go to plan and you lose the love of your life?
Hi and welcome to this episode of Pods with Posh and Bull. Today we are joined by Will. Nice to see you, Will.
Thanks, good to be here.
Will, back in 2018, your wife lost her battle with cancer, and there you were in Sydney, left with your 2 beautiful boys. At the time they would have been 11 and 2, is that right?
That's right.
So how did you cope with it all?
I didn't cope with it all. That's how
Yeah.
I muddled on with life, thinking that I had to maintain a certain facade and strength, and just initiated every mistake I possibly could between March 2018 and now.
And you say initiated every mistake. What does that even mean? What does that encompass?
Well, I sat down with a few professionals and they said, here's things you shouldn't do. Things like don't make any changes to the family living situation within 2 years. And none of that went in, clearly, because I went back to my home after Elise died and sat down and thought, you've got to be a superhero. You've got to fix this for yourself and your kids and society, and you better get busy. And rather than just down tools and be calm, I went all frenetic and started preparing the house for sale.
And I guess we don't know how we're going to respond until grief hits, do we? Until the situation arises. I know there'll be many listeners that will be listening to the podcast today that have either nursed a dying partner or have had time to prepare for a significant death, and yet when that moment strikes, probably everything goes out the window.
It does, Sue. Yeah. She got sick she didn't get diagnosed until 12 weeks before she died, so it was rapid. She was fine up until Chris went to a Christmas party in Melbourne about 2 weeks before she was diagnosed. And then she felt a little bit ill. She got called into the doctors. She said, it sounds like it might be serious. I don't know. Would you come with me? And I said, look, it won't be much. You've just had a few stomach upsets. It'll be IBS or something. Don't worry too much about it. And she said, look, I really want you to come. So I cancelled a business meeting on the Monday, went in with her and to the doctors, and then a couple of very senior doctors just came straight out and said, stage 4, it's everywhere, you've got 12 weeks, sorry.
So you were given 12 weeks at the time.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that? How did that sink in together as a couple?
About the opposite way you're told in movies that it does. So there wasn't any handover or goodbyes or I love yous or I'm going to miss you, here's what I want you to do with the children. It's really, you get caught up in the war against the cancer, and the person with the cancer, in our situation, retreats into a childlike position and really looks the other way and says to themselves and to those around, I'm going to beat this, and this is just a small blip in the road, despite what you're being told. And so I had to become the adult and she became the child, and then she would say, the one doctor did surgery and said, look, I can confirm again that you've got 12 weeks. And then she'd say, what did he say? And then she'd start planning the next 10 years of our life together. And I would then talk to her about that and accept that and have a chat with and validate what she was thinking. And then I'd go away and talk to the doctors and say, okay, so how do I prepare for her dying in 10 weeks from now?
And I guess for her, that was her coping strategy. She couldn't hear it. She had to live on hope. Even when it was probably coming to the last weekdays, I imagine she was still living on hope. And we can't plan how we react, can we, to situations? There is no textbook when you're suffering like that, to that degree.
That's right. She thought we were going to go to a wedding in Paris about a week before she died. So I remember my mother died a couple of years before, and the same situation of not acceptance, no handover. And so the person that's left, in this instance me, there's no closure, there's no Hollywood, there's no I want you to do this for the kids, and I've always sorry about this, and I tell my mum I love her, and that's all complete rubbish. There's just the fight, the denial, the medical system, which has so much more it could be doing. There's so much missing in that space that I could go on about forever. And then the person just dies. And even for my son, who's 13, Elise was from Hong Kong. She was very academic. She was very, you'd call it tiger mum. And so she was very driven, and she had brought herself up from the ghetto to be somebody in her mind. Mm-hmm. And so she pushed my 13-year-old equally hard. And 3 days before she died, I got him in there and I said to her, you need to say goodbye to him. I don't know if she knew what was going on, but I sure did. And then she said, watch your times tables.
It's really interesting that you say you can talk about what's sort of missing in the medical profession, because I've got a sister that runs palliative care in New Zealand, and they're very much about connecting the children and the dying parent, and writing stories and giving them hopes and dreams of the future, and building photograph albums and preparing children or the wider family for the process. I'm quite interested that didn't take place for you. Is that because the medical profession were responding to where she was at and what she needed at that time, do you think?
We were in Sydney at North Shore Hospital, and I don't remember any of that happening. I tried that. I bought in notebooks and asked her to write, and I took in a video on my phone. Let's leave some legacy for the children. That was us doing that. There was no one in the hospital that was helping with that. We couldn't even get a psychologist in. They wouldn't come into there was some gap between, we can't come into the hospital, you have to come to us. And I said, well, we're not coming to you. She's weeks away from death, but it'd be sure handy if you'd come in and sit with me and the kids.
It's so hard, isn't it? And everything you describe and just shows as humans, we are flawed, and that's how we are. We're perfectly imperfect, and we don't know how we're going to react to any situation. We think we do. We think we can plan these things in our head. If I was to get this information, this is how I'd respond. If this was to happen, this is how I think I'd react. But actually, we just don't know if we're going to go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And poor Elise was just in pure denial because she just didn't have it in her to say goodbye.
Well, at the end of the day, Joe, Elise was the one going through the process of dying. So as much as I love my children and I wanted to take care of them and me, I had to put her first. So I had to respect, in my mind, the way she wanted to die. And if that was it, I was trying to... She had a lot of issues with her mother, and I brought her mother in from Hong Kong. Her mother doesn't speak English, and I was trying to get her mother to make up with Elise because they'd had huge catastrophic issues over life. And just go in there and tell her you love her and that you forgive each other for all the past sins, and I couldn't get that to work. So,
and for listeners, again, this is all really helpful information in the sense that those that are nursing loved ones, or in your situation where you had children to cope with as well, that you're having to fulfill so many roles. You're trying to meet your needs, you're trying to look after Elise and your children. On an earlier podcast, we had somebody talk about their tragic situation and the role of the village and the community that comes in to support. Did you have family around you that could kind of step in and just look after the children, or what kind of support did you have in place at that time?
Well, we were proud, stupid people, and we decided to live in Sydney by ourselves because we thought that was what people that were like us would do. So we're trying to be champions of our own destiny. So we'd isolated ourselves in Sydney. We loved it there, but we had zero family. Her family were in Hong Kong, my family were in Auckland. Luckily, we'd built up a really strong community in northern Sydney, and the families around us in the school started running rosters of dinners, and we ran hospital rosters to go and see her, and we ran child care rosters for my boys. So, and my sister, who's an amazing human being, flew in and flew out from Auckland, I think once a week.
Wow.
To help. So she was in and out constantly, and that was supportive. We made support for us. We made it work.
Because it's so important to have a community around, isn't it? Because I often think when that community is in place, people meet different needs. Somebody might drop a meal, somebody, as you say, might take children. But you quite quickly decided to make a move back to Auckland, didn't you? Tell us about that.
I don't know if I made the decision to make that move. Kind of life almost made it for me. I wanted to be that strong person and continue on with the legacy of what Elise had left. And she was in the crematorium in Sydney, you know, her ashes were close by. And I wanted to, Elise and I had planned to live in Sydney for the rest of our lives, and we'd planned to retire there, and we'd planned to generate the family legacy in Sydney. And I didn't want to let her down. I didn't want to let me down. I didn't want to let my boys down, because I thought this is what we'd planned. I'm not going to give that plan up easily. So I soldiered on for 15 or 16 months. And during that time, I had points where I myself had to go to hospital for various health conditions that were a result of the grieving and pain and mental anguish I was going through, that I was trying to bury deep down as low as I could to make sure I could bring up my 4-year-old and my 13-year-old as good as possible. So it got to a point where my sister was flying in and out, my cousin flew in and out a couple of times to assist, and eventually I could hear them without even saying it. Come on.
Come back.
Stop being such an ignorant asshole and get on back to Auckland, where we can actually just drive over and help you rather than fly over to help you.
Yeah, because we can all be a bit proud, can't we? And I know you'd made these big plans with Elise to stay in Sydney, but however, life changed beyond measure for you, and therefore probably making the move back, as you say, where you've got your community, where you've got those people on hand, and we can all be a bit proud and think that we can cope through and we can get through anything. However, your body was telling you different, wasn't it? By going to hospital, by burying it deep.
Yeah.
But if we bury our feelings, if we don't address them, they're going to come up and they're going to slap us in the face somehow, aren't they?
Strangely, yes. The mind and the body my mind and body seem to be very connected. And the physical, on the anniversary of her death, the first year, I ended up just on the actual day, I woke up with, what's the vein at the back of your body called on your leg that runs down? Sciatica. Oh my gosh, I've never experienced pain like that before in my life. And that's when I checked myself into the hospital. I got the ambulance out, and I was screaming. And that not randomly, I mean, my mind had worked out the weeks before that it was coming, and her anniversary was there. And I was up at 4:00 at the gym in the morning. And, I was running on huge amounts of adrenaline from the testosterone. I was trying to kill myself, I think, with adrenaline and getting work done, kids done, get Max sorted, get Oscar on board, get my family proud of me, just.
But that's what you did at the time to try and survive, isn't it? Because we're all looking for survival. Somebody once said to me, there's the year of the firsts, which is the first anniversary, the first Christmas, the first child's birthday without their mother or significant person being around. And I think for listeners, that's a really mammoth year to get through. Once you've done the first, it's almost easier to do the second anniversary than the first. But that first year is really tough, isn't it? It's bleak, it's hard.
It's miserable. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the time, you're a bit like you're like an alcoholic or a depressed person that's just refusing to believe it. And I refused to believe any of it. I was just like, I can do this. I'll soldier on. I've got this. I'll do it for her, do it for me. And in the meantime, my world's collapsing around me and I'm refusing to see it. And I'm refusing to get help, refusing to give up.
How did you deal with your grief in the end?
Still dealing with it. I'm still in denial. I keep waiting for her to turn up and come into the kitchen and tell me, what have you done moving us to Auckland? I don't want to live in this house. This is not the kind of decor we should be living in. I don't want Max going to that school. What are you doing? She's such a big person and so important in my life. And when she came into the room, you bloody noticed it. She was very strong, very dedicated. She was the alpha of the family. She was the boss. I was more of the kind mother and she was the hard-ass father that got shit done. And she'd set the plans up financially and business-wise, and we'd sit down every year and review how we're doing, and she'd have a spreadsheet. We'd be lying in bed at night and she'd have a spreadsheet open and I'd have a self-help book open. So,
but she's still there with you, obviously, because you're listening to her voice. She's still around. I don't think she'll ever go, will she? She's the mother of your children. She was the love of your life. She will always be there in one form or another. But how do you deal with everyday life? You're obviously living back in Auckland now with your boys. You've got your family close by. How do you deal with your grief, honestly? Like, what's your coping mechanism? What's your turn to?
My naughty coping mechanism is wine, which I find it hard to curb a glass of that in the evenings with dinner. And my other coping mechanism is the gym. So I tend to overdo it. I find peace. The only real peace I get in my mind is when I'm exercising, and I think my body's just trying to cope with the fitness and not think about the evil thoughts or the nasty thoughts. Yeah. And we've all seen grief psychologists for quite a while. I haven't seen one in Auckland. I'm about to go and see one on Friday at the Grief Centre in Birkenhead. But in Sydney, I saw someone a lot, and they helped me a great deal. I couldn't overstate the importance of counselling and therapy. And back to my point before, part of what I felt really sad was, or disappointed, was that I had to go looking for that and I had to engage it myself. It didn't come out of the death. You'd think in the medical profession that you've just lost your wife, they've seen you in the hospital every day, they've seen the two kids. They say, look, here's an array of, we've set you up with interviews, go and see them, see which one you like. But none of that happens. You go off and it's crickets. It's this huge volume of intensity before the person dies. Everybody's around you, the medical profession, your friends, your family, and then they die. It's like graduating uni. Wait, you're done now.
And that's something you hear again and again, isn't it? That, once the funeral's happened and everyone's supported you, everyone's come along and there's been support while the person's sick or when the person's died, then it stops. Then you get on with your life and everything returns to normal, and then you don't mention the person ever again. You literally move on. Have you seen the series on Netflix, Afterlife?
No.
Well, that reminds me of your story in many ways. And during the episodes, he's lost his wife, but he comes back and he watches little video recordings she's done. She's, don't forget to feed the dog and don't forget to take the dog for a walk, and off he gets and does what she's saying. And it shows the journey of a man trying to recover from a loss of a wife, when he tries to go out and he tries to work hard, and that's the boss at work says, come on, I'm going to take you out tonight to yoga or whatever it is, and you can see the desperate attempt to carry on with life, and he goes back home and just listens to his wife again chatting, and it's the constant grief and him saying, I want to get over it, I want to heal, I want to move on, but you don't understand, she was the most important person in my life, I won't get over her, there's nothing I can do. And it just is such a sense of reality that when we lose somebody we care about so much, there's nothing we can do to suddenly get over them or move on. That you might turn to drink or drugs or the gym or whatever it is to keep ourselves busy, but actually at the end of the day, grief is grief and loss is loss, and it's huge. And for listeners that have lost somebody now, they will so relate to your story that you can't just move on. The grief is raw, it's huge, isn't it?
And it doesn't just equate to grief from somebody dying either. I think people feel like this when they've lost a partner, when maybe they've been left and somebody's gone off with somebody else. I think the grief is very similar, and you know, your story, Will, shows us that sometimes we just literally can't do things on our own. You know, you obviously seen a grief counsellor, like you said, you went and sought help in Sydney and they helped you, and now you're going back there, and I think it's such a great step to do. You know, we can all be stoic and we can all think we can do it, and we can all be aware of our good and bad habits as well, and good habits can turn into bad habits, like the gym. You know, you think going to the gym would be a really healthy thing to do, but if you're pushing your body to such extremes, it's almost a punishment to yourself rather than something that's really healthy. And I think it's really important for listeners to know it's okay to go and turn to somebody, and it might not be a grief counsellor, it might be somebody online, it might be just be going to a self-help group, it might be just getting connection, it might be talking to your best friend, but really go out and seek that help that you need, because we can't do it alone. We're supposed to be a community.
Yeah, and also to admit the only thing that you feel will help you recover is if that person comes back again. You know,
Totally.
that's the
And
only thing that will heal you from your loss, is if that person would walk back through the room and they were back in your life.
And nothing prepares you. Society doesn't talk about death. It's as if it's not going to happen. People spend more time investigating what house they're going to buy, or what job they're going to do, or what person they're going to end up with, and your whole life is, and then suddenly death happens, and everyone just wants to sweep it under the carpet and not talk about it. And so when they see me coming, they know I'm the agent of death. I've seen it, I've closed it. When they see me, they see Elise, and they suddenly think about death. They're like, let's just not see Will, and that way I won't have to deal with it. And I'll talk about it. I'm my friend, like, oh, you know, how long since she died, and I'll be like, well, you know, 2 months or whatever, and then people start crying in front of me, and it's, which is fine, but it's just, can we just have the conversation more often, because everyone's going to see it, and can we just stop sweeping it under the carpet? And then so when it does happen, it's more normal, and we're not left in this like shock of a tornado just came through a house and we've never seen a tornado in New Zealand before.
And you can read it on people's faces, can't you? Because I remember I was quite young and my mother died, and instantly I lost all my friends because they didn't know what to say. They were young, and rightly so, they hadn't experienced death before. But I remember thinking, gosh, I've lost my mother and I've lost all my friends as well, and if I mentioned her, which I should have been able to do, you could just see their faces. And I get it, I understand it completely, but it's an additional grief on top of it, having to mop up other people's emotions or be sensitive to how they might react if you mention your wife's name when they can mention their wife's name, but you can't.
Do you talk about Elise a lot with the boys at home?
I try to bring her into the conversation as much as possible to make it more normalized. It's hard because that person can't speak. They're not here. So we do say things like, oh, that shop, boy, Mum would love that one, wouldn't she? She'd be in there buying up a storm.
Yeah.
Or she'd love this food. She was really into prosciutto and something else. And so it's not constant because the person isn't there, but it is, I always mindful it needs to be more, because the boys are so confused. The 13-year-old is just angry beyond belief, and the 4-year-old just can't figure it out. He doesn't understand, so he says, can we just all die and then we can be with Mummy?
I get that.
Then we can all be where she is.
Yeah. So. And has he found access to grief counselling or support? Has that been readily accessible in Auckland?
The 4 or the 13?
13-year-old.
It hasn't been forthcoming. Once again, it kind of feels like I'm the only one who's doing this. So it's almost like no one can recommend something. Surely there must be recommendations everywhere, but I think no one wants to talk about it. So no, it hasn't been. But I've finally had the strength, and I've committed to Auckland, that I've gone looking for it, and I've found this grief centre in Birkenhead, and I see them on Friday this week to have a chat about me and chat about Max, and then I'll bring him back into it. Max and I have had multiple clashes, significantly large clashes, that I've got the person in Sydney into the middle of it as a mediator.
Great.
And that's helped.
Yeah, because Max is obviously angry. You're saying he's really, really angry. And we were saying to an earlier guest, anger is a second emotion. Anger is never a first emotion. It's brought on by something else. And now it's the grief counsel obviously helped Max get to the bottom of that. And, as you know, you suppressed your feelings and you ended up with health issues. Whereas Max is, at least he's getting some of it out by showing anger. At least he's releasing some energy, which is a positive thing. And if he can do that with you, it's showing that it's in such he feels safe with you. That's actually a really positive thing for children. But the poor kid just needs to get to that. He's just probably lost, isn't he? Bless him. He's had his whole world. He's like had the carpet swept from under his feet. And our mums are our biggest things in our life, aren't they? How do any of us get over that? It's really difficult, isn't it? And just understanding that and just showing him he's loved.
And the message from most of our guests that are in traumatic situations or going through some severe adversity or suffering is that they naturally want to connect with people going through the same thing. Have you found support groups where you can connect with men who are bereft and bringing up children on their own? Have you found a connection in any sense in that area?
I haven't.
No.
I've looked a couple of times. I went to something at one point, but I seem to be unique again, and I thought, this is not for me. I want to be not unique.
Yeah.
And since then, I haven't been able to track down a group. And my therapist early on said, I don't know if now's the right time for you to be in that space because it's too new. You want to be supported by people that aren't grieving. For what happened at one point in Sydney was we often had au pairs to help us. We were both busy working people. Well, busy is a stupid word. You're as busy as you are lacking in productivity, but we were both working in corporations, which required us to be out of the house for the day. And so we had au pairs from Europe come. We had 10 of them over the period of 8 years. And as Elise was dying, I needed them even more than ever. And after she died, I had someone come who had lost her parent when she was young. And the thought was that would be synergistic. But the reality was she was still coping with that loss 10 years after it had happened. So it was clash city. It wasn't support city.
Yeah.
And so I think that said to me, as my therapist was saying, until you're ready for a group, surround yourself by people that aren't as compromised as you are.
Yeah, because you can't take on their grief as well as your own. You're not strong
That's what ended
enough.
up happening. Yeah.
It's interesting because we've had various men come on board talk about a range of different emotions. One with sexual abuse, being abused, raped as a child, aged 7. And he was talking about the role of therapy, but also how good it was when he got together with men's groups, when men could talk about their feelings about being raped at a young age as well, and how therapeutic that was because it normalized the feelings. It didn't make him feel so isolated from the rest of the world. So therapy played its part. But he said the men's group was even more empowering in a sense, wasn't it? Because he didn't feel so abnormal in the sense that he's holding on to these feelings. Other people shared those intense feelings as well. That I guess there's a role for all sorts of different therapy in our life, for having a community, for having that village surround us, for having one-on-one grief counselling, for having connecting groups where we connect. In the same sense that the SANS for mothers that have lost babies at birth, mothers meeting mothers and talking about the trauma of losing a baby in this way that you can't, I guess, when you're a mother's group with other babies. And that also is an important part of our healing journey.
Quite jealous of the female community versus the male community. Men don't seem to be able to, or not allowed to, they must maintain this position of independence and strength, and because their history shows they should be the strong alpha that needs to work independently, and that's perpetuated. So the males in my life might say, do you want to come to the pub? and the females in my life will say, can I take care of the kids? And I'm telling you, what I need is kids taken care of. That's the key for me. I've got a 4-year-old, and then the females tend to connect and converse constantly. And I'm a true believer that if you're not speaking about an emotion, you can't deal with it. Yeah. So if you're not talking, if you're not physically using your mouth to articulate words, you're not going to get through something. But being a single father amongst other fathers, the communication doesn't flow. I think if I died and Elise was alive, there'd be a lot more chit chat.
And I think that message would be shared by so many men, in the sense that as women, we're much more naturally inclined to meet with our girlfriends to chat. And all of the men that we have on the podcast are really interesting, because they say the same thing as you. You know, we want to talk. We want to not have this stoic image of being a man that has to survive it. That actually we need men. And a few of the men that have come aboard have formed men's groups. Men meet men. And it's not just about men being able to talk about their feelings, but men calling other men out, saying, hey mate, you've got something in mind, what is it? And actually not allowing men to become that stoic person that's going to have stiff upper lip and not talk about it, how important that is. And I think male listeners will really resonate with what you're saying, that it's even more healthy, isn't it, to be able to be allowed to speak and be safe to speak about your feelings and emotions.
I mean, yeah, it is. There's many great things about masculine energy, and I don't wish to underplay the importance of it. I think masculine energy is extremely important, and at this point in history, it seems to be almost pushed back against in some way. But there is that need to be masculine and be strong and have masculine energy, but also to be able to chat. So I tend to talk a lot with my sister. The poor thing gets too much conversation from me about this, and my cousin Charmaine, she gets a lot of chats from me as well, and then there'll be some others. Strangely, they're always female. Anyway, yeah. So.
But it's with the nurturing ones, aren't we? I mean, right, we do talk. Women talk. I mean, look how many words we use every day in comparison to men. We talk. It's what we do, but we listen as well. But it is a shame. But it's such a pressure for a man to feel that he has to have that picture of him, isn't it? Like you have to be stoic, that you have to carry the weight of the world. And that's why I think it's so important for men to speak out on things like podcasts, to let other men know it's actually okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to speak about what's in here, what's inside, because you can't hold it in. You end up, it will come out somehow, and whether that's with health issues, depression, anger, rage, abuse, self-abuse, abusing others, it can come out in so many various ways. We've all got to start talking more and listening more.
And being real. I mean, we're writing a course on pain at the moment, and when Joe said to me, what is pain? I just said it's F*** tough, without wanting to say it on a podcast, but actually it is pretty tough, but in a stronger word, isn't it? When you're in it, it is really hard. Before we leave, Will, with all the messages that you've brought to our listeners today, what would you say to those people that are literally in raw grief right now, that don't know what to do with it?
That's a tough one, because it's a unique journey, and I guess I made so many mistakes after Elise died that were almost textbook. It was sadly hilarious. That allow yourself to make the mistakes and be okay with it, because you'll make them, and that's okay. And I thought I wouldn't make them because I was better than that, but I proved to myself and the world that I made all of them, and that's all right. But in saying that, try to make sure there's some people around you that will pick you up when you fall down, because you'll fall down a lot. And if you don't have a support group, then God help your kids, because when I fell down a lot, there was someone to come and get the kids. Yeah. And because the kids are looking to me as the last bastion against the wild. And when I've collapsed a couple of times, there needed to be someone to walk in that front door and say, I got this, because the kids are terrified.
Yeah. And the message of hope, I think, is always that when we look back, there was actually somebody always there, even though we thought we were on our own. And isn't it interesting that you had your cousin and your sister, two people that have obviously been quite extraordinary on your journey, walking that with you. We can't be rescued, but we can have people alongside us in it.
Well, I hope your grief counselling goes well, and I hope you can really get some help for Max as well. That'd be awesome. And you know, it's a journey, and as we've said with our earlier guests, they say time is a great healer. It's not necessarily the truth, but I just think we get better at coping with our pain over time. We learn more tools, we learn more mechanisms, and hopefully we introduce healthy habits into our life to help us every day, to make us better and stronger. And what doesn't kill us does actually make us stronger. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Pool. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.